You're halfway. God knows you're halfway into fulfilling your destiny and your purpose. You're halfway there. You make half the money they do. You got half the house they do. You got half the degrees you do. But watch this. Even with half, you got double favor. And some of y'all ought to thank God. Even with the little bit I got, God is in fact multiplying it. They're halfway in completing the walls, and that's when the attack shows up. Oh, this is going to mess with you. Verse number 7 declares to us that when they're under attack, halfway there, that's when the gap starts closing. I want you to understand this, that the enemy is using your issues as a distraction. You are so focused on the attack that you haven't noticed that gaps are closing. And I want to speak a word prophetically in this house, that even while you're at PIP this week, God is closing some gaps in your house. He's closing some gaps in your bank account. He's closing some gaps with your children. Don't get caught up in the attack. You ought to look at the gaps that are being closed even while you're in this auditorium. Says the gaps are starting to close. Stuff is starting to come closer together. The gaps are starting to close. I just really need 53 people to preach with me and just shout out, the gaps are closing. The gap. Oh, God, the gaps are closed. Stuff that was broken down, stuff that was separated, stuff that was out of order, stuff that had lost its place. God said, while you were on the wall, I was filling the gap. You didn't even know you got to stand still because the cement is still wet. God, help me. Because if you move it too quick, a brick will fall out of place. And I'm so sick of folk who are judging life based off of where it is now. When you're a person of faith, you don't look at life at where it is now. You look at it for where it's about to be next. And I wish I had some sanctified believers who could feel down in your bosom that the Lord is closing up some gaps and you don't even have to do nothing but stand there. When the gaps are closing, the Bible shares with us, that's when they plotted in verse number 8 to stir up trouble against us. While the gaps are closing is when the enemy kicks in confusion. You have to understand now that the enemy never wants you to marvel at your progress. He always wants you to focus on the negative while ignoring the positive. That's why you've got to guard yourself with the people who bring you bad news. Because some people who you got close to you, they bring the disease called negativity. Because every time they come close, they can always tell you what's going wrong, but they'll never tell you what's going right. That's why you've got to be more selective about who you sit with in church. Because while I'm in church, I don't want you whispering to me about who's sitting next to who and who got on what and did you hear who they riding with. You got to come to the place where I am selective. I'm not stuck up. I'm just determined that when I come into the house of God, I don't have time for confusion, foolishness, and minutia. But if you're not praying for me, don't say nothing to me. I don't need a mint. I don't need a fan. I don't need you to give me a program. I don't need you to pass me a note. If you talking to me, just tell me that you see angels walking through the building, walking through the auditorium. The spirit of confusion. Spirit of confusion is coming, and I don't have much time, but verse number 10 says, Judah says, strengthen the laborers because there's too much trash around the wall. I wish I had time to deal with this, but you know by now, surely you know by now, that Judah means praise. text. And I want you to understand that implied in this text is that true praise makes you take out the trash. Because you cannot be a praiser and bring mess with you. When you are a praiser, you got to reevaluate your environment. That's why some folk can't sit beside you, because praise gets on their nerves. But when you're connected